Hello and welcome to the tutorial that I am creating for the spreadsheet template that I created for the 319 Clean Water Act contract reports for Environmental Protection Division for the state of Georgia, although potentially this template could be used in other states or applications as well. I've wanted to create and potentially share this template with others who will be administrating and reporting on the 319 contracts in our office, but potentially could be used by others in other offices as well. So I'm going to endeavor in this tutorial to span information that would be relevant both for those who are experienced with 319s, but also those who are new to these reports. And so anyway, here in part one of this video tutorial, I'm going to just give a basic explanation of how this spreadsheet works. I'm going to assume that the viewer has a basic working knowledge of Microsoft Excel. If you do not, I encourage you to watch some videos on YouTube and get yourself familiar with Excel so that you can follow what is being explained here. Alright, as you can see here following my cursor along the bottom of this spreadsheet workbook, there are multiple individual spreadsheets. Here at the beginning, we have two particular kind of standalone documents, cumulative budget, or cum budget as I've called it here, and final report. And then after that are the various spreadsheets associated with the different quarters of a project. Invoice for quarter one, report for quarter one, doc for quarter one, which stands for documentation, and travel for quarter one. And I do hope following this tutorial to actually create perhaps a couple more spreadsheets, at least one for each quarter, specifically one where you would have the employee timesheets. So you may or may not see those in the version of the template that you are viewing as part of this tutorial. But for now, with this part one of the tutorial, you'll get a basic introduction to how I've created it. This cumulative budget document, to start with, is the place where we're tracking all of our expenses throughout the course of the contract. Our organization had this basic or a simple version of this template, of this kind of spreadsheet, for our own internal purposes. And when I arrived, when I started working here. However, I found that there were times when it was not getting updated, or perhaps sometimes there were errors and incongruencies between this spreadsheet and the invoice documents or the report documents, and so I created them here in Excel in such a way so that they'd all be linked, and so that we would minimize errors and incongruencies between them and hopefully eliminate them. To give a basic further explanation of this specific worksheet, it's broken down by categories, or also known as buckets, throughout the life of a particular contract. So to begin with, we might have a contract bucket for a program manager, as well as perhaps a project coordinator. I've abbreviated here, project coordinator, as well as an administrator. And as my understanding, my limited understanding of 319s based on just a year of working with 319 reports, that usually those three positions are the only ones that you would have, but in case there are situations that arise in which there would be additional personnel as part of 319, I've created a fourth category simply called Other for personnel. I've also created a column here that totals all the personnel costs. For those not familiar with 319s, each of these buckets refer to the federal charges. Those we're actually invoicing or charging the program for, and then next to it is the match for that bucket or category. In other words, that's funds that we are contributing in some way through some service or effort on our organizational part to contribute to the project, and so we track the amounts associated with that match for that particular category. So you'd have the program manager federal charge here, and then the program manager match next to it, and so on. Project coordinator federal amount, and then the match for the project coordinator here, and so on. And then again here, in some cases I've created kind of totals for a particular category, such as personnel. So all personnel are totaled here, and all the match is totaled next to it for all personnel. Many other categories don't fit into kind of aren't a subcategory, they're their own category, such as travel typically is, fringe benefits particularly is equipment. But then you have others, such as supplies, which are broken down into subcategories, and then a total supplies bucket, which is here. So this, in the spreadsheet, this supplies bucket total will automatically total all your sub buckets for supplies 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. In every given contract, you could rename these, so you could have supplies 1, and then though I have field supplies in here, you could change that to another term that fits your particular contract. Maybe you would have BMP supplies or something like that. Here we have office supplies, marketing supplies, watershed model supplies, adopt-a-stream supplies, and so on. Those are simply the ones I've encountered in my organization's contracts. And then those are totaled here. Then there are further categories. This is the contractual category, which I have a limited understanding of how contractual works. There's a lot of variances in these contracts, and that's particularly true of the contractual bucket. And so pay close attention to the actual contract that you're working from. That'll be paperwork that'll come from the State Environmental Protection Division, typically, that delineates specifically what each bucket amount is, and for the life of the contract, and what subcategories there are. Many times with many contracts you will not have this many sub buckets. So for contractual example, I've created 5 different sub buckets here. Many times you won't have that many, and so you could hide the columns that are not relevant to that particular contract. For example, I've created a contractor A, which might be a program manager, or contract B, for example, administrator. For this particular template, typically these things would be program manager and admin would be part of personnel, but I've encountered a 319 where we shuffled them over to contractual, the contractual bucket. But if you're not using that particular column for that contract, you could highlight, right click, and then hide that column. So it's kind of out of your way, and you would do so for the associated match column if you're not using it for that particular contract, just so you don't have quite so many columns to distract from focus. So I'm going to unhide those by pressing Control Z in this case to undo the last thing that I did, which was simply hiding those columns. There are times with these total buckets that kind of total up the previous sub-buckets that you may not need that. Some might find them distracting. For example, here I have our other category next, other office space, other cell phone, other internet, other website hosting, and then all of our other federal charges combined, all in the other category. I know sometimes it might seem immediately evident why you would need them all combined as well as broken down into sub-buckets, but I've just found there to often be, from time to time, unexpected reasons why I needed that total or I needed this sub-bucket broken down. There was even one case, perhaps it was a final report, where I kind of needed the telecommunications components of my other category combined. That is the website hosting, the internet chart costs, the cell phone, and so on. And so I created here, as you can see, cell, internet, web combined, a column that would total all those. If those are distracting for you, you could hide them. But I want to caution whenever you hide any columns or rows, be wary. At times I've encountered issues in the spreadsheet where my totals for the whole project were off and I had difficulty finding the error in my spreadsheet, and sometimes it was because of a figure that was in a hidden column. So you just have to be aware of that if you're going to hide columns. If you've got a spreadsheet, a copy of this template that you're using just for a specific contract, you could delete them instead of hiding them here by clicking delete. However, I would be wary of that until a person gets really familiar with this template, because you could be deleting a column that then is somehow feeding into another spreadsheet. Because as you'll see as I go down, these spreadsheets are all linked. When you put in a number in one place, it populates and shows up in another document somewhere else much of the time. And so you've got to be wary of what you delete or what you change. Okay. So continuing on down here, we have our totals for the whole project. Before I get to that, I just want to mention with our other category, we have some kind of unusual elements sometimes with our other category. We have other, I put all the federal totals up here, and then I have for our other category the match for it, but without the volunteer hours included, because I found times I needed that number for all the match for my other category, but it needed it to not include my volunteer hours or a facility donation when we had a special event, such as a partnership meeting, and we got the donation of the facility, use of the facility. And so I have here your match for all your other bucket without any volunteer hours or facility donation. And then here is your match bucket that includes all of the other category and the match, including volunteer hours and event facility donation. Again, this is for the match, not the federal charge, but the match. And finally, indirect expenses. And I recognize there may be some projects that has some buckets, such as indirect, that only have federal charges and not any match, or only match and not any federal. And those more experienced with 319s may be able to add a little more nuance to this template and corrections where I perhaps included things that you wouldn't typically see in a 319. However, I want to mention that I've found that I'll receive information from a source that will indicate, oh, we don't ever have match on a 319 for indirect. And then I'll soon thereafter encounter a 319 where we did have indirect expense match. So I've kind of tried to cover a lot of bases here with this spreadsheet and possible scenarios that might arise from unexpected categories, buckets being created, and so on, based on our past interactions with our EPD office. But of course you could adjust this template to your own liking and choosing, kind of your own version of it, if you will, based on your own experience and what seems best to you. Okay, we have here total federal charges for the quarter for all our different buckets, for the federal charges, for all our other bucket, all of our contractual bucket, all of our personnel bucket, and going all the way back, all our supplies, etc., all our equipment, travel, etc., etc. All of those totaled up. Contrasting those with our original estimates for that quarter based on what was put into the original paperwork for that 319 contract. Then you have the cumulative to date. So anyone familiar with 319 reports already know that on our report we need that cumulative number of how much we spent so far. And so this will quarter to quarter keep adding that up, you'll see. So here I have a small amount for quarter one, and then quarter two has got a bit more. And then because it's adding both quarter one and quarter two, and then it would keep adding. From quarter three on, which you can see I've highlighted here, I haven't populated this particular example, but I'll demonstrate that further in subsequent tutorial sessions. Then we have our match total for the quarter, original estimate for match for the quarter, and cumulative match to date. Again, it's compiling it to date. So in this, so far, quarter one, I had $500 in this example of match, and I didn't have any match in quarter two, which would be highly unusual, but that's just what the numbers I have here in the moment. So it shows the total of all my quarters to date. I still just have 500, and then these ones here have not updated, and I might have an issue here why these are not populating and showing 500 to date. And I will mention from time to time I do encounter errors on this spreadsheet where it's not calculating just right. And so you be aware of that. You might encounter errors in your use of this template. So for example, as I understand it, cumulative match to date, if I have $500 in my first quarter of match, well, it should be populating at least that much all the way down through all my quarters. Then we have project total here, so that's our federal charge and charges and our match total all together. So here starting quarter one, quarter two, and on down. This figure here is how much was originally budgeted or expected or allotted, if you will, for the 319 contract. So that's this line here that it's only got a few numbers filled in at the moment in the template. But yeah. And then we have our total project cumulative to date. So this is how much our project has total spent so far to date. We'll fill out in this column. I'll be filling in a few more numbers throughout tutorials and become a little more evident how this works. For example, right now I just had set it up for only one particular number to be in each quarter. I believe that's back over here in the Personnel Program Manager. I put 833 for every quarter up through the 12th quarter. And so that's what's showing up over here on this end as our total, and then it's accumulating, adding up that total so far spent to date over here in this column. With that, I'm going to pause and I'll continue in the next part.